All right, so let's get coding. Let's put some of those ideas from our PowerPoint prior to this video prior to this. Let's put some of that into action and actually write some methods. All right, so I've kind of started us off here. We have this, what we've already been comfortable creating so far. And actually now we'll start to see that that main is actually a method. And because we call it main, it's the method that runs automatically when we first run our program. We can start to see that word static. We'll see that more and more. And the idea behind static then is I can access this method directly from this class. So I can access main, void, it's not returning anything. So when this method is finished, it'll just end. It doesn't return any data to where it came from. Main, the main is the name we've become accustomed to, and it's a capital M. Main is receiving a string of arrays, and we'll look at arrays soon enough. And those arrays, that string of arrays, that array of strings is put into this variable named args, which we're not going to be doing anything with at this point in time. But I just wanted you to recognize that main is just a method, just like all the other methods we're going to write, with the exception of the name. So this particular main method has some lines of code in it that ideally by the definition is going to do a single task. We have some very simple lines. We're prompting our user for a name. We're getting that name and putting it into this variable and writing that back out to the keyboard. And then read key, of course, is holding our window open if we wish to, so we can see what was output. Fantastic. So let's start thinking about methods. So I'm going to create a new method. And presumably then I'm going to put all of these lines of code in a new method that's actually going to be called print name. And so let me just write this out. So I'm going to use the word static because this method is going to be available from within my program class. So I'm going to write static, and what that means is that I'll be able to invoke or call that from my main method, and we'll see that here in a second. So static, I'm not going to return anything. I'm going to print a name. And by convention then my variable, my method name is a verb that has some kind of meaning, and it's that Pascal case, so capital P and capital N. This particular method is not going to receive any information, so I'm going to do the opening and closing parentheses with nothing in it, and then put my opening and closing braces to indicate that that's where my method is going to be. That's where my statements are going to be housed. And we're just going to copy this code, Control X, and put it into our print name method. All right, sounds good so far. So as it stands, main is going to run. It's going to execute all the lines within its opening and closing curly braces. And all it has is a moment is read key, so it'll never call this method. It'll never run this line of code. So we have to invoke it or call it. In other words, ask it to go look at that method and run it. And it's very easy to call it. We're just going to type out the name of the method that we created. Notice that IntelliSense is giving us some kind of indication that it recognizes the method that we created. It's giving us what's called the signature, which is simply what is the return type. What class is green is what class can I find it in? I can find it because it's within myself. And there's the name of the method. Empty braces, so it's not receiving any data. So if I just type in print name, it should in fact print out that name. And let's just run it just to make sure. Debug, start without debugging. And in fact, seems like it's working. So one other thing I'm going to add in this particular video, we've created our first method, but I'm also going to reiterate using debugging because I think this is a very helpful tool to get comfortable with, and starting easy and building up is a great way to get comfortable with it. So what I'm doing is creating what's called a breakpoint, which is this red dot to the left of my line number in this light gray column here. And the idea behind a breakpoint is I'm asking the program to run, but stop at this line. Don't run this line until I ask you to, because I want to see what's happening line by line. And so by doing this, this is a really helpful tool. I can hit debug, and I'm going to start debugging with this F5 as a shortcut. And this is going to become very useful. as we get more and more advanced with our code. And even some of you with some of the assignments you've already turned in, I don't know why my code is not printing out the extra 0. Well, if you walk through line by line, we can see what the variables are doing. In other words, it's stopped. The program has stopped at print name. It says, I'm waiting for you to tell me to move on. This little arrow down says step into, which means I can, it's a fancy way for saying, just go to the next line of code you would normally execute, Mr. Program. And it does. It says, well, the next line is this curly brace, which isn't doing anything. You can see the little yellow arrow saying this is where I'm currently stopped. So then we're going to say, well, go to the next line. Again, it hasn't executed this line until we've passed it. So it's waiting for us to pass the line and go to the next line. So if I look at my console window here, it did in fact print out what is your name. So I'm going to, again, execute the next line. It's sitting on my console waiting to receive a name. I'll put in my name and hit enter. And here's where it starts to get handy. Once I hit that enter key, that whatever I typed in at the keyboard was put into name. So I can see what value changed at that last line because it's red. So when I hit step into again, this will turn white. It'll just tell me the most recent change that was done. And so now I know that name is getting the right value that I expected, so I'm good. Seems like that's a good thing to do. Step into, so it should then have processed that line, executed that line. It did. I'm going to continue to walk through it. I can see that the code has now returned to the line that called it. It's now going to do the read key. When I click step into, it'll execute the read key. It's waiting for me to do something. And by virtue of that, I should be able to finish. Read key should be executing. And once I close the window, then I can tell that the code has completed its debugging because I don't have my little, oh, there it is. Oh, I'm running it again. Okay. I don't have my little arrows anymore. And if I just want to completely stop and say, you know what, I'm done with this. I got the point. I can hit this stop debugging and that'll just obviously stop, or I can hit the continue, which continues to the next breakpoint. If I don't have any breakpoints, then the code will just continue to run. So it looks like it did what it was supposed to and it exited. So debugging is your friend. Get comfortable with it. Get comfortable with how to use it and use it to look at what your variable names are. As well as we saw how debug walked from line to line and returned back to where it came so we could see that method call being executed.